cold wind carried dust down the lone street of that small frontier town, where wood buildings leaned slightly and horses tied by the post shook their heads as if they sensed trouble. Folks whispered at porches and saloon doors while their eyes stayed fixed on one young woman standing in the dusty square with her hands held tight against her chest. She looked tired, pale, and scared, like someone who had walked through storms far too long. No one cared where she came from or why she lived alone in a broken wagon near the creek. Today only one word mattered in every mouth: theft. The sheriff stood near her while older townsmen pushed forward, claiming she had stolen something precious. Nobody had even asked her if she was innocent. They acted like their decision had already been written on the wind. She kept her chin down, holding back tears, refusing to look at the crowd that once ignored her, but now wanted to push her toward the harshest end. Her boots trembled on the dirt, but her spirit tried to stay strong. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, saying she never took a thing from anyone. No one listened. She was an outsider, and that single label was heavier than all ropes, chains, or jail bars. The town was already filled with anger, and her voice was like a drop of rain in a long drought. Some of the women crossed their arms, saying a poor outsider could never be trusted, while children hid behind skirts, sensing something dark growing. It all started 3 nights ago, when the trading store owner cried that something valuable was missing from his locked box. The town needed someone to blame, and she was the easiest target. She had no family, no home, no money, and no friends to speak for her. A stranger sleeping near their town was enough reason for them to point hands. They searched her wagon, but only found a blanket, a small Bible, and a dirty tin cup. That was not enough to clear her name. Their fear turned into anger, and anger into judgment. In an old frontier town, justice did not always wait for truth. Sometimes it followed the loudest voice. She tried to explain who she was, but every time she opened her mouth, someone shouted over her. She came from far lands, hoping to build a small life through honest work. When the cold months grew strong, she offered to wash clothes, cook bread, or clean stables. Some ignored her, some laughed, some told her to keep walking. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go, and because deep in her heart, she believed she could earn a humble place. She believed people in the West could still be fair if they heard her truth. But now she realized the frontier was not just a land of new chances. It was also a land where your fate could change overnight. The sheriff himself was unsure. He rubbed his jaw, watching her quiet face. Something in his eyes showed doubt. He even asked the crowd if anyone saw her near the store that night, but no answer came. No witness, no proof, nothing except fear and talk. A tall ranchwoman at the front said it did not matter. She claimed that if a stranger could sleep so close to town without permission, she could easily do other wrong things. A man shouted that if town law did not stand strong, outsiders would come and take everything. Voices rose like a storm while the sun dropped lower behind the hills. She stood alone, wondering why life always pushed her to the edge. She remembered silent nights, staring at cold stars, praying that somewhere she would be given a fair chance. Her heart hurt, not because she feared for her life, but because not a single person tried to see her as human. She looked around hoping someone would stand up for her. No one moved. Even the sheriff lowered his head, afraid of the crowd. She felt her breath shorten, her knees weakened as if all strength drained into the dirt below. The moment felt colder than winter. A rope hung from the sheriff's hand, not yet used but heavy with meaning. She stared at it and whispered a prayer inside her heart. She wished her mother were still alive to hold her hand. She wished she could explain how she lost everything on her journey across empty plains and tall mountains. But wishes did not carry weight in a town that already chose its ending. Her lips trembled, and a tear slipped before she could stop it. Some folks looked away, but not from guilt, only to harden their hearts. Right when the tension reached its highest peak, something changed in the wind. A slow and steady drumbeat echoed across the plain, followed by the sound of one lone horse approaching. Everyone turned. Dust rose behind a tall rider wearing Apache clothing, his dark hair tied with leather strips. His face calm but fierce, like someone who had walked through battles of land, hunger, and spirit. Nobody expected anyone from the Apache side to ride into their town at a moment like this. Town men moved their hands toward rifles, women stepped back, and whispers turned into shaking breaths. He guided his horse forward, stopping close to the young woman. His eyes studied her face with quiet understanding, like he already knew something everyone else refused to see. The crowd stayed silent, unsure if he came with peace or a warning. Then he placed his hand on his chest and spoke in strong English, neither loud nor fearful. He said he had come because this woman's fate was tied to a truth none of them had asked for. The sheriff frowned, and several men shouted that this matter belonged to the town, not to the Apache. But the warrior did not step back. He dismounted slowly, turning toward every person present, as if weighing their hearts. He did not raise his voice or show anger. Instead, he said that the missing item was not stolen. The crowd froze. Some laughed in disbelief. Others demanded proof. The warrior reached into his pouch, then paused, choosing his words with care. He spoke about honor, land, promises, and truth, and his tone carried more weight than every threat thrown at her. The young woman looked at him in shock, wondering why a man from the Apache nation would ride into danger for her. When her own town refused to hear her voice, the warrior stepped forward as the last red light of sunset touched the ground. And with the whole town staring, he revealed something that changed every heartbeat in that silent street. Yet he said it in a way that left them confused, stunned, and uncertain of what would come next. The street stayed quiet, like the whole town had forgotten how to breathe. The sheriff held the rope looser now, unsure of his next move. And the young woman, with shaking hands, stared at the Apache warrior as if she had never seen anything so unexpected in her life. Her heartbeat thumped loud in her ears, and though she did not understand what he planned to say, she felt the weight of his arrival settle over her like a blanket she had prayed for without knowing. People whispered that maybe he wanted something in return, or maybe he came only to stir trouble. Fear mixed with curiosity, and nobody dared to step away. The warrior lifted his gaze and told them he had been near the store that night, not far from where the lantern-like glow touched the window. Folks blinked in confusion. No one had imagined anyone outside their own circle could have seen anything. The sheriff took a slow breath, and for a moment, it felt like his duty pulled him harder than the voices of the angry crowd. He asked the warrior why he cared about this matter at all. The warrior said he was traveling alone for his own reasons and had passed by the creek several times. He said he had seen the young woman gather sticks for fire, clean her tin cup at the water, and sit quietly near her wagon without causing any trouble. He had watched her from a distance, not because he mistrusted her, but because he understood what survival looked like in a land that forgot soft hearts. The people were not ready to listen. One farmer shouted that maybe the warrior was lying to protect someone like him, someone with no place among them. A woman said that outsiders always protected each other, no matter the crime. The young woman shook her head softly, feeling guilt, even though she knew she had done nothing. The warrior did not react with anger. His voice stayed even, as though he carried years of patience. He said he had something more to say, but not while surrounded by voices that only wanted judgment. He asked to speak with the sheriff alone, somewhere away from loud breath and shaking fists. The sheriff hesitated. He had a badge that represented order, but a town full of people that demanded haste. His eyes shifted between the crowd and the quiet stranger. Something inside him whispered that if he refused, he might regret it. So he nodded and asked the warrior to walk with him. The young woman begged with her eyes to go too, not wanting to be left standing in the square with folks ready to blame her again. After a short moment, the sheriff agreed. He told the crowd to stay put and told his deputy to watch over them. The three walked toward the back of the sheriff's office, where a lantern hung low and the creek flowed within earshot. There the warrior explained more. He said he knew about the missing item, not because he saw her steal, but because he saw someone else that night, moving near the trading store window with too much care for a person who had no business being there. The sheriff leaned closer, asking who it was, but the warrior did not speak the name yet. He said truth must be handled the right way, or it would break apart like dry wood. He said he needed the sheriff to listen without fear, because fear would take the story in the wrong direction. The young woman listened while tears rolled quietly. Not because she was saved, but because someone finally sounded like they believed her. The sheriff looked troubled. He wanted clarity, fast and clear, but the warrior seemed to work through things in his own rhythm. The warrior also asked if the sheriff understood why the town had judged her so easily. The sheriff said people feared what they did not know, especially on a land that gave little room for trust. The warrior nodded and said fear was like wind. It changed direction without asking and could destroy anything that stood alone. He looked at the young woman and asked her if she had any memory worth sharing that might help them understand. How she ended up at the creek with nothing but a broken wagon and a worn blanket. She hesitated, holding her hands together. She had tried to keep her story hidden because she did not want pity or more judgment. But now it mattered. She told them she was once married, living near a small valley where her husband tended to livestock. She said life was simple, but kindness was present, and that was enough. Then disease came, and her husband fell sick. She tried to get help, but the nearest doctor lived far away, and the journey took too long. Her husband passed, leaving her with nothing but their wagon and a few items of memory. She sold what she could, then traveled in hope of finding work. She came across this town thinking someone might help her start a new life. When no one did, she settled by the creek, hoping to survive with whatever strength remained. Her voice cracked as she said she never begged, and she never took anything that did not belong to her. She said the blanket she used belonged to her late husband, and she kept it to remember warmth and promise. She said all she wanted was a fair chance. The sheriff's eyes softened, and the warrior nodded. As if he had already known she carried a pain too deep to show, the sheriff finally asked the warrior what he saw that night. The warrior said he saw a young boy, no older than 12 or 13, sneaking near the trading store window. He said the boy looked frightened, hungry, and desperate. The sheriff's face changed because he knew there were few children in town and most lived under strict family watch. The warrior said the boy entered from the back, not breaking anything, but using small hands to lift the latch. He stayed inside for only a short moment, then left with something hidden under his shirt. The warrior said he thought the boy would return it, but fear made him run instead. The sheriff ran a hand over his face, trying to understand why a child would risk something like that. Before he could speak, the warrior added something more unsettling. He said when the young woman was accused the next morning, the same boy stood in the square, hiding behind the crowd with guilt shadowing his eyes. The young woman gasped, remembering how she saw a small figure near the trading store days earlier, but chose not to speak. Because she did not want to get involved. The sheriff knew what he had to do, but he also feared how the town would take it. People were already restless, and if they found out a child was involved, they might turn even more unpredictable. The warrior reminded him that truth must not depend on who was easier to blame. The young woman whispered that she did not want the child to face harm, even if it meant staying silent. The warrior looked at her kindly, saying true justice meant protecting both innocence and the chance of redemption. Before they could decide on their next step, someone outside shouted, demanding answers. The deputy knocked on the door, saying the crowd was growing restless, and some were calling for town justice if the sheriff did not return soon. Through the crack in the window, they could see men lighting lanterns and gathering closer with anger spreading like dry fire through grassland. The warrior stepped forward, saying they must not allow lies, fear, or unfinished truths to rule the moment. The sheriff agreed, but he still asked the warrior why he cared so much. The warrior looked toward the dark sky and said that long ago, his own people had been judged without proof too many times. He had seen lives broken by rumors, not facts. He said he did not want another story written in the same ink. The young woman felt a small piece of hope rise in her chest. But it was fragile, like thin glass. She knew one wrong move could crush it. The sheriff slowly lifted the latch, ready to walk back to the square. The warrior placed his hand on the sheriff's arm and said he would stand beside him no matter how the town reacted. The young woman followed behind, stepping with caution, feeling every heartbeat echoed louder than footsteps. As they reached the edge of the square, the crowd turned toward them, expecting a quick answer. The sheriff opened his mouth to speak, but before any sound escaped, a sudden voice cut through the night from within the group, shaking every mind and turning every eye toward a truth none expected. The voice that sliced through the night was thin and shaking, but it carried better than any shout. It came from near the middle of the crowd, where a young boy stood half-hidden between two men. His hands were balled into fists, and his eyes were wide with something that looked a lot like terror. He did not call out a full sentence, only one word that hung in the air like a bell. No. Every head turned toward him. The sheriff froze. The Apache warrior watched him with a still expression, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The boy's mother tried to pull him back, pressing a hand to his shoulder, but he shook free and stumbled forward. Lantern light showed his pale face streaked with dirt and dried tears. He did not look brave. He looked like someone whose secret was about to crush him. The young woman who stood accused felt her heart twist. She had seen that same boy once near the creek trying to catch a frog, laughing softly when he thought no one was listening. Now he looked like he was walking toward a cliff. The murmurs rose as folks recognized him. He was the general store owner's own nephew, a boy who helped sweep floors and carry sacks when his uncle's back hurt. The same uncle who had shouted the loudest when the item went missing, demanding they make an example out of the outsider woman. The uncle now grasped for the boy's arm, but the boy stepped out of reach and faced the sheriff with a trembling jaw. The sheriff asked him gently what he meant by that single word. The boy swallowed hard, glancing at his uncle, then at the Apache warrior, then at the young woman whose life hung in the balance. His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, his uncle barked at him to hush and go home. The crowd tensed. Some looked from one face to another, sensing something was wrong beneath the surface. The Apache warrior stepped slightly forward, not menacing, just steady. He told the boy that truth was like an arrow. Once it left the bow, it flew its course. He said holding it back would only stab the one who refused to let it go. Those words seemed to reach something inside the boy. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand and blurted out that the missing item was not stolen by the woman at all. It was taken by him. Gasps broke out. The boy's mother let out a soft cry. The uncle's face went red as embers, and he shouted that the boy was confused, that he did not know what he was saying. But the boy insisted. His voice gained strength as if each word lifted a little weight from his chest. He said he had sneaked into the store the night before because he was scared his uncle would close the doors for good. Business had been poor through the last months. Wagons did not stop as much as they used to. Hunters traded less. Ranchers held tight to their coins. He said he believed that. If he could borrow the small thing from the lockbox and trade it quietly with travelers, he could bring back enough money to make his uncle proud. To keep the store open, to prove he was not just a useless child. He had watched his uncle count coins at night, heard him mutter about bad luck and outsiders. In the mind of a desperate boy, taking that one item seemed like a way to save everything. He explained he meant to return it after finding a fair price. But once he took it, fear grew inside him. He hid it near the creek, then spent the night awake, shaking in bed. When his uncle discovered it gone and pointed at the stranger woman, the boy tried to speak, but his throat felt locked. His uncle's anger scared him more than any whipping or scolding ever had. Daylight came. The accusation rose, and the boy stayed quiet, letting another shoulders carry his guilt. The crowd grew restless, torn between shock and doubt. One rancher shouted that the boy must be lying to protect the woman. Another said no child would risk his uncle's rage unless something real pressed on his conscience. The young woman stood frozen. The word theft no longer sat on her alone, but the sting of being accused still burned. Her eyes filled with tears, not from relief yet, from the storm of emotions rising inside her. The sheriff stared at the boy, then at the boy's uncle. He asked the store owner if he had told the whole truth. The uncle sputtered, saying his nephew was weak, easily swayed, maybe even threatened by the Apache. He pointed a shaking finger at the warrior, claiming this was all a trick to cover up what had really happened. Some in the crowd quickly grabbed that idea, eager to keep their simple story alive. Blame the outsider woman or blame the Apache man. Either was easier than facing the thought that one of their own had done wrong. The Apache warrior did not flinch at the accusation. He said calmly that he had seen the boy with his own eyes near the store that night. He repeated every detail, from the direction the boy came, to the way he paused at the door, to how quickly he slipped away. He said he had followed him at a distance and saw where he hid the item near the creek, under a flat stone near a crooked cottonwood tree. A few heads turned. The sheriff knew that tree well. The young woman felt her heart pound harder. That same tree was not far from her wagon. The warrior's words made it sound like the missing item lay close to the only place she had called home in weeks. No wonder they blamed her. No wonder the town believed their theory. The boy looked down at his boots, confirming in a small voice that what the warrior said was true. The sheriff knew he needed to check. Yet if he turned his back on the crowd now, they might erupt. Anger and shame twisted together in the square, like two snakes sharing the same hole. Some people did not want the truth if it meant turning their anger inward. The idea that a needy boy could be forgiven scared them less than the idea that they had almost let their anger take an innocent life. There were other layers to the conflict, too. For years, the town had lived with tension along the edges of Apache land. Some had lost livestock. Some had lost kin in old raids or skirmishes. Stories grew taller each time they were told. Children were raised to fear the sight of Apache riders on distant ridges. In the minds of many, Apache meant danger, and danger meant they should strike first to feel safe. Yet here stood an Apache warrior, stepping into their affairs not to harm or threaten, but to speak for fairness. Some of the younger men in town did not like that at all. They murmured to each other that this was truly about pride. They asked what gave this warrior the right to tell them about justice on their land. They felt their authority challenged. If the sheriff listened to the Apache man more than to them, what did that say about their strength? One hot-tempered fellow suggested they drive the warrior out first, then deal with the woman and boy afterward. The deputy heard that and shifted his hand closer to his belt. He did not want trouble, but he knew where such talk could lead. The Apache warrior caught the movement and raised his palms to show he carried no weapon in hand. His calm only made some men more uneasy. It is easier to fight someone shouting than someone standing still. At the edge of the circle stood a ranch widow and her teenage daughter. They watched quietly, not joining the shouts. The widow had once received unexpected help from an Apache woman who found her lost cattle and guided them back to the fence line during a storm. She had never told the story in town for fear of being laughed at, but it burned in her memory. Seeing this warrior stand for the accused woman reminded her of that past kindness. Her daughter tugged her sleeve, whispering that maybe they should speak for the woman. The widow hesitated, weighing her place in the town against the ache in her conscience. Near the saloon door stood the preacher, hands folded, eyes troubled. He had taught many sermons on mercy and truth. At the first heat of accusation, he had remained silent, carried along by the tide. Now he watched the Apache man and the boy and felt a heavy shame in his chest. If justice failed here, it would stain every future word he spoke from his little wooden pulpit. Yet stepping forward meant standing against neighbors he had known for years. His silence became its own struggle. A private battle inside him. The young woman felt all these currents without knowing their full shape. She only knew she was tired of being treated as less than human. When she had lost her husband, she had believed that pain was the deepest she would ever know. But the past days had shown her a new kind of hurt. One that came not from loss, but from being seen as a problem to be removed instead of a person to be understood. When the boy had confessed, she should have felt relief. Instead, her heart was tangled with pity for him and anger at the town that had pressed him into such fear. The sheriff finally raised his hand, calling for quiet. He said he would send his deputy and 2 townsmen to the creek to see if the item was truly hidden where the warrior claimed. Until they returned, no one would lay a hand on the woman or the boy. Murmurs of protest rose, but the badge on his chest still held some power. And the firm line of his jaw told the crowd he would not bend easily this time. The deputy chose the ranch widow's daughter and one older farmer to go along, perhaps to calm both sides. Together they headed off into the dark, carrying a lantern that swung like a nervous heartbeat. The crowd waited, tension stretching thin. Some took sides quietly, whispering in small groups. Some still stared at the Apache warrior with narrowed eyes, while others watched the accused woman, seeing her in a new light but not ready to admit it aloud. The boy stood near his mother, shaking. His uncle glared at him like he was a stranger. Not a soul knew yet what would become of him if the item was found where he said. Would the town punish a child the way they almost punished a lonely woman? Would his uncle forgive him? Or would he throw him from his house? No one dared ask out loud. The Apache warrior stepped a little closer to the young woman and spoke. Low, so only she and the sheriff heard him. He said this night was not just about one missing thing. It was about what kind of people this town wanted to be on land that had already seen too much blood and blame. The sheriff nodded, feeling the weight of all the eyes on his back. Lanterns burned lower as time passed, their light turning more golden and restless. Every creak of saddle leather, every cough, every shift of boot in the dust sounded louder than it should. The young woman felt as if she stood in a narrow canyon with walls closing in. The boy wiped his eyes again, his confession hanging in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The uncle's fists clenched and unclenched, his thoughts a storm no one could read. Then, at last, shapes appeared returning from the direction of the creek. The lantern swung higher as the deputy approached. Something clutched against his chest, and the ranch widow's daughter walking beside him with her mouth pressed tight, eyes wide. The farmer followed, face pale. The crowd leaned forward as one, hearts beating hard, waiting to see what they carried and what it would mean for the woman by the rope. The boy who had spoken up, the Apache warrior who had stepped into their business, in a town that now stood on the edge of a choice that would mark them for a long time to come. The deputy held the lantern high and stepped into the square. But he did not speak right away. His eyes moved from the sheriff to the Apache warrior and then to the terrified young woman whose hands trembled at her sides. Everyone leaned forward as if their breath was tied to his next word. The item he carried was wrapped in a small piece of cloth, muddy and damp from where it had been buried near the creek. The ranch widow's daughter kept her hand near her mouth, and the old farmer stared at the ground as if it still chilled him. The crowd shifted restlessly, feeling the tension rise like a storm pulling clouds. Together above their heads, the sheriff asked the deputy to confirm whether the item matched the one missing from the store. The deputy hesitated only a moment, then unwrapped the small bundle carefully. The crowd saw a silver trinket with a tiny eagle carved on one side and a faded ribbon tucked underneath. Several gasps filled the air. It was the same item the store owner had spoken about, not valuable in money, but valuable in memory. The owner had once said it belonged to his father and carried sentimental worth. Seeing it now in the deputy's hands shook him in a way that only personal history could. His face twisted with confusion, anger, and disbelief as he stared at his nephew, who stood trembling like a leaf holding on against wind. Some people muttered that the matter was settled now. Others demanded to know why the warrior had stayed silent until this night if he had seen what happened. The warrior replied gently that he had hoped the boy would find courage to return it, or tell the truth without being pushed. He said sometimes a person must choose honesty by their own will, or the lesson would never stay in their heart. His voice carried a kind of steady wisdom that unsettled those who expected rage or pride. The sheriff studied him with newfound respect. But the uncle stepped forward, shaking with pride and frustration, shouting that the town could not let outside voices decide their matters. The sheriff took a long breath, trying to calm the heat around them. He announced they would move the boy, the woman, and the store owner inside the church until he sorted what was fair. But the angry voices roared again. Some argued that the woman deserved an apology but not forgiveness, saying her presence near the creek had brought nothing but trouble. Another argued that, if a child committed wrong, the family should pay in his place. The boy's mother cried, shielding him with her arms. The uncle, still unable to face his own part in the storm, said the warrior had planted the item himself to twist their minds. His words stuck harder than stones because fear often hunted for new shapes when its old ones crumbled. The preacher finally stepped forward, raising his hand. His voice shook at first, but strengthened with every word. He reminded the town that justice was not a reward for the powerful or a weapon for the angry. He said if they punished the wrong person, they would never rest easy again because truth leaves marks even when silence tries to hide it. His words stirred some hearts, but others still clung to their doubts. The sheriff realized that choosing the right path might break the trust of half the town, yet choosing the wrong path would break something far deeper within himself. He asked the Apache warrior what he believed should happen next. The warrior looked up toward the stars, then said the young woman must be cleared of blame publicly. The boy must be guided, not shattered. He said mistakes made from fear could still be healed if handled with honesty and understanding. The crowd muttered, unsure if forgiveness was a path they even trusted. Across the square, two cowhands whispered that if the sheriff sided with the Apache, it would change the power balance forever. Others whispered that maybe it was time power shifted, because distrust had grown like weeds for too long. The young woman, feeling both relief and fear, stepped forward and addressed the crowd for the first time since the accusation. Her voice shook but did not break. She said she did not hate them for turning against her, even though it broke her heart. She said she understood that fear made people suspicious, especially in tough times. She told them she had only wanted a chance to live in peace, to find work, and to breathe where no one remembered her loss. Her words softened a few faces, but the uncle still did not accept it. He shouted again that this was a trick, and the warrior must have hidden the item to protect her. In that moment, the warrior did something unexpected. He reached slowly into a small leather pouch at his side and withdrew a carved wooden medallion. He explained that it was given to him long ago when he was trained in the ways of truth by his own chief. He said he carried it only when he spoke for honor, not for personal gain. The gesture caught the crowd off guard, not because of the item itself, but because they recognized sincerity, even if they did not accept his ways. His calm never wavered, and the way he held himself made it clear he had no desire to control them, only to prevent a wrongful harm that could stain many lives. With the square hanging on a fragile thread, the sheriff decided they would walk to the creek again together. In full view of the town, to verify the hiding place and how the stone was set, so no one could accuse the warrior or the woman of planting evidence. The deputy carried the lantern, and the group began to move, with the entire town following slowly behind like a long, uneasy shadow. The wind picked up and moved across the grass, making loose boards creak and the sign outside the saloon swing like an omen caught between two sides. At the creek, the deputy showed exactly where he had found the buried item. The cottonwood tree leaned the same way the warrior described, its branches reaching like crooked arms above the water. The hole where the item had been lay fresh, and the cloth still smelled of wet earth. The uncle stared at it, but his pride would not bend. He said anyone could have done it. He said tracks in the mud proved nothing. The sheriff saw in his face that some people would rather cling to their anger than admit their fear had misled them. But before he could speak, the boy broke free from his mother and ran to the tree. He knelt and touched the hole, whispering with tears that he had dug it with his own hands because he didn't want anyone to see him cry. Silence spread. Heavier now than before, the truth was clear as daylight, yet the town still held tension, like a rope pulled tight. The young woman felt tears slip down her cheeks, both from relief and from the quiet hurt that lingered even after innocence was proven. The warrior looked at the boy with steady eyes and told him that the hardest part of truth was speaking it. When everyone else had chosen another path, the boy nodded, tears running freely, while his uncle stared as if his world had tilted. As they walked back toward the town square, the air felt different, but not settled. The sheriff knew he would have to speak soon, and his voice carried enough weight to decide how the next chapter would unfold. He planned to clear the young woman publicly, but he also needed to consider how to handle the boy, and how to heal the angry pride of a community that still wrestled with fear. People watched every step the sheriff took. Waiting to see whether justice would breathe or break, the Apache warrior stayed close to the young woman. Not protectively in a forceful way, but with a presence that said she no longer stood unseen. She looked at him with soft disbelief, wondering why someone from a world so different would risk trouble for a stranger with nothing to offer. She felt something stir in her, not romance, but respect, gratitude, and a strange calm she had not known for a long time. The boy walked slowly behind with his mother's arm around him, unsure of his future. Some children looked at him with sympathy, others with confusion, trying to understand how courage and mistake could exist together. The preacher trailed near the back, deep in thought, while the ranch widow whispered to her daughter that maybe this night would change the way their town judged outsiders forever. Back in the square, lanterns still glowed, but the night had grown colder. The sheriff climbed onto a small wagon step, ready to face the crowd. The woman stood slightly apart, the boy near his mother, and the Apache warrior stood with his back straight, watching the sheriff's eyes. Everyone waited, aware that whatever came next would decide whether the town's future would rise towards something better or sink into a past without learning. The sheriff opened his mouth, the words rising inside him, but before he spoke, thunder rumbled far off on the horizon, and a single drop of rain hit the ground between them, as if the sky itself paused to see what kind of judgment the town would choose. The sheriff waited until the last echo of thunder rolled away. Then he spoke in a calm voice that carried across the square. He said the town could no longer ignore the truth that had come to light. He said the woman standing before them was innocent and should never have been blamed without proof. He told them that fear had made them rush toward judgment, and if they wished to call themselves a community, they must learn to protect the weak instead of pushing them toward harm. The square fell silent as his words sank deep into every ear, even those still wrestling with pride and anger. He then spoke about the boy, saying he had done wrong, but not out of cruelty or greed. He said the boy acted from fear, hope, and misunderstanding, believing he could save his uncle's store through his own risky plan. The sheriff said punishment without guidance would only break him, and a broken child would help no one, not his uncle, not the town, and not the future. Instead, the boy must make things right through honest work and by helping the store he wished to protect. The deputy nodded, and even the preacher agreed, saying forgiveness meant more when paired with learning and responsibility. The uncle stood stiff, his jaw tight, but there was nowhere left to hide. All eyes had seen the evidence, heard the truth, and watched his nephew confess. The pride that once seemed like armor now felt like a heavy chain. He looked at the boy's face, realized how scared and lost he must have felt, and some of the hardness faded from his eyes. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, not with anger, but with a quiet, tired breath. He told him he should have spoken sooner, but he also said he understood why the boy felt trapped. It was not a full apology, but it was a start, and sometimes that was enough to let a new path open. The sheriff turned to the woman and told her she was free, not only in word, but in honor. He said she deserved a choice now, rather than being forced to move on like a shadow in the wind. She listened with tears, feeling her heart lighten for the first time since she arrived. She thanked him, her voice soft but steady, and she thanked the Apache warrior who had spoken for her when no one else would. She told the crowd she held no anger toward them, for she believed fear had ruled them more than hate. Her words surprised many, because forgiveness is often harder than accusation. Soft rain began to fall, washing away dust and cooling tempers. Some of the townspeople approached her with lowered heads, offering simple words of regret. A few of them, including the ranch widow, offered her a place to stay if she wished it. Others said they would help her find work so she could begin again. Children peeked at her from behind skirts, now curious and no longer frightened. Even those who had spoken harshly earlier felt a quiet shift inside, though they did not speak it aloud. The Apache warrior stood apart, watching with calm eyes as the scene softened. He did not smile, but there was a peaceful strength in his face. When she walked toward him, she asked why he chose to defend her when he could have easily ridden away. He told her that every life deserved truth and respect. He could not ride on knowing an innocent person would suffer from silence. He said too much sorrow had fallen upon both his people and the settlers because voices were ignored instead of heard. He believed that helping one person choose justice could shape a wider path someday. The boy then stepped forward to face her. He said he was sorry not only for taking the item but for letting her stand alone while he hid behind fear. His tears mixed with the falling rain, and she placed her hand gently on his shoulder, telling him he still had time to grow into a man who did right, not one who lived in regret. The Apache warrior watched, and for the first time that night, a small glimmer of hope flickered in the boy's eyes, as the town slowly returned to normal motion. The sheriff invited everyone into the church to warm and dry themselves. The young woman was given a seat near the fire, and the widow wrapped her in a dry shawl. The preacher thanked the warrior for his courage and said that his presence had reminded them that honor did not belong to any one land, language, or family. It lived in actions, not claims. A few men, who earlier bristled with suspicion, now nodded at him respectfully. Realizing they had misjudged someone who had shown more peace and strength than any loud boast ever could, the storm outside grew stronger for a little while, knocking heavy drops against the church windows, but inside there was calm. The boy sat with his uncle, who spoke to him quietly, telling him about the value of truth and how hard it could be to face mistakes. The woman listened, feeling comfort rise slowly like warm light after long darkness. When the storm passed, the air smelled fresh, as if something heavy had been washed away. The next morning, as the sun rose across the plains, the sheriff gathered everyone once more to discuss how the woman could start her new life. The ranch widow offered her temporary shelter, and one of the older women said she needed help with sewing and mending clothes in exchange for fair pay and meals. The preacher also said she could assist with school lessons for the younger children, since she had spoken with kind clarity the night before. She accepted with a grateful heart, knowing, for the first time, she could stand in the town square without being seen as a danger or burden. The boy began helping his uncle openly by greeting visitors, sweeping the porch and carrying supplies with an honest effort. The sheriff checked in on him often, reminding him that mistakes were not life sentences as long as growth followed. The warrior visited the store and spoke with the uncle, telling him that fear could destroy families just as easily as strangers. The uncle listened in silence and thanked him quietly before returning to his work. As for the Apache warrior, he prepared to leave after knowing the woman was safe. He had come as a traveler and would return as one. On the morning of his departure, the woman walked with him to the edge of town. She thanked him again, not only for saving her life, but for reminding her that goodness existed even in places where hope seemed lost. He told her she now carried a new beginning and must use it wisely. She promised she would, and though neither spoke of destiny or fate, both knew their meeting would remain a turning point in their lives. Before he mounted his horse, she asked if he believed their paths might cross again. He said the world was wide, but kind souls often found their way back to one another in unexpected ways. Then, with the rising sun behind him, he rode away across the open land, not looking back because he trusted she no longer stood alone in the days that followed. The town slowly repaired its reputation, learning to think before judging, to listen before shouting, and to guide before blaming. The woman worked hard, built friendships, and found new reasons to smile. The boy grew stronger in character, learning that truth, respect, and courage mattered more than quick solutions. The sheriff carried pride differently now, with quieter strength. And though the warrior was gone, the lessons he left stayed like a mark on the land, gentle yet lasting. The story faded into memory, but its meaning stayed. Some said the rain that night had washed away more than dust. Others said it was the first time the town learned that justice was not only about catching the wrong, but protecting the right. The young woman kept her promise, building a peaceful life and helping others find hope. And as long as the wind moved through the cottonwood tree by the creek, it carried the whisper of the night, when an Apache warrior stepped forward and changed everything through courage, patience, and truth.